Hey everybody, thanks for tuning into the new and improved Blakey Locks YouTube channel. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with as many friends as possible. It's going to be a great summer of college football prep. Enjoy. Today is the very first episode of the 2023 college football preview series. It is episode 1 with Corby, aka Keep Betting Co. on Twitter. It is going to be the ACC preview. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your favorite ACC future for this season.
All right, I'd now like to welcome on a very special guest. It is Corby at Keep Betting Co. on Twitter. Corby, what's up?
Yeah, man, how's it going? We've talked for quite some time. I think it's the first time in person, but known you for too long at this point. So by all means, it's overdue.
Yeah, I'm excited we're doing this. We've been weirdly connected through different things over the last couple of years, and have always talked kind of behind the scenes, but finally doing some kind of show together, which is fun. And this is going to be the ACC preview. Interesting conference. It's at least hopefully more interesting than it's been the last few years. No longer a one-team conference, but we'll get into that. So the plan is basically we're just going to go team by team through the conference and kind of talk things out. The top maybe 4 or 5 teams, we probably have a lot more to talk about. And then there are some really terrible teams in this conference, but sometimes they're also fun to talk about. So I guess when you talk ACC, you kind of have to start with Clemson always. They've won 7 of the last 8 conference championships in the ACC. They've obviously won national championships, been to the college football playoff. Should have made the college football playoff last year, but couldn't beat my Gamecocks the last week of the season, and took themselves out of the playoff race, which I was very happy about. It was a bit of a transitional year for them last year with Brett Venables leaving, who had kind of made their defense the powerhouse that it was. And even though he didn't have a great first year at Oklahoma, you could see a bit of an impact that made on their defense, especially in the secondary. Also, kind of looking at the South Carolina game, like I was talking about, I don't think a Venables defense would have let Spencer Rattler do that to them, throw for whatever, 400 yards or whatever. And not that the defense was even bad. I think they were a top 10 scoring defense, but to be Clemson, I think they have to be like a top 3 defense in every category. What do you see for them defensively in year 2 without Venables? Can they kind of get back to that elite status?
Yeah, there's a couple problems with Clemson. So the first one is they really don't try to use a transfer portal by any means. Like they're more of a breed them yourself, and Bud Elliott's kind of hit this nail on the head, but they've never really tried too hard in the portal. Like they could easily make Alabama runs, make Georgia runs. They are a team who has been at the higher of all high ups for years and has the ability to get transfers, but they really don't try. So the issue becomes have they built in those players to continue the road that they're trying to run? And I think from a talent standpoint, there's teams that are passing that quickly. And so we see the ability for Clemson to be worse, but I think that they still have too much talent at this point. I also, not defensively, I think defensively is going to be always a little bit of a downfall from where they peaked, which is it's hard to sustain. But the biggest thing for me is I love Garrett Riley. I thought I really wanted him to go to Alabama. Born and raised in Alabama, so I was really hoping he would be here. I think that he's one of the better play callers I've seen in a long time. So I'd be curious how long of a leash he gets. But I think that that's a really good pickup for an offense who, I mean, is starting a sophomore quarterback. Like they're going to have issues by all means. And I still don't think DJ was awful last year. I think that he got put into a system that was awful. And so it's like, if he had Garrett Riley, would he have been good? And so I think that Klubnik is just going to excel even further with a better quarterback coach, not quarterback coach, but offensive coordinator in general. And then it's Clemson's make or break year. Like I think last year, even though they were as solid as they were, there was a lot of disappointment. So I think this year is a big year, and things will turn around. At some point, you have to start getting into the transfer portal. It sucks, but it's the name of the game in 2023, and I can't believe they made it this far without it.
I know, it's like looking at, obviously we're going to talk about them in a minute, but they're main competition in the conference is Florida State, team that's gotten tons of offseason hype. And when you look at the transfer portal, like that's the reason Florida State's been able to make that jump up to Clemson's kind of talent level. Is Florida State's done an amazing job in the transfer portal, and Mike Norvell has gone like kind of all in on getting guys from the transfer portal. And yeah, Dabo's just kind of been really slow to adapt to all that. I think even with NIL, obviously he once promised that he would quit coaching college football if players got paid, which we haven't seen. We haven't seen the results of that yet.
I mean, I didn't even know like the depth of how bad they were in the transfer portal. They're last in the ACC in transfer portal. They only had one commitment, and so it's like they're literally not even trying.
No, they could make a minimal effort, and there will be a few guys that will want to go play there, even if they're not really getting big offers. But so it's crazy. But they still do have a lot of talent, and like you said, I mean, Garrett Riley made Max Duggan a Heisman candidate and went to the national championship game. So, I mean, what he could do with more talent is obviously you got to think would be really good, but you never know. And when guys change schools, sometimes things just don't click. And in certain systems, and like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if at TCU they were like, hey man, like, you know what you're doing, like call whatever you want anytime. Like, this is your offense. You have the keys. And kind of what we've been talking about with Dabo, he is kind of old school in the sense that I don't know if he will be totally like, yeah, just go do whatever you want. Like, you obviously know what you're doing when it comes to running an offense. He might be a little more hands-on, trying to control the offense. So really going to have to wait and see on that. But yeah, Cade Klubnik obviously has tons of talent. He's way more talented than Max Duggan, for example. So theoretically, Garrett Riley should be able to do big things with him. And they do have Will Shipley, who's maybe the best running back in the conference, and they're gonna have the talent for sure. It's really just going to be about whether everything clicks, and probably does come down to the quarterback play a bit. Whether Klubnik's ready for a big year, if he still maybe needs one more year, and next year would be that year for him. But schedule wise, they don't have the easiest schedule, but they do get Florida State, Notre Dame, and UNC all at home, which is pretty big. That's probably their three toughest, at least conference. Notre Dame, not technically conference, but those games all at home. And then even Miami, which is probably their toughest conference road game, they get off a bye. So scheduling wise, I think things kind of work out well for them. I would be really surprised. I would be shocked if they didn't make the conference championship game. So if you were to be betting a conference future, it's probably going to be Clemson, Florida State. And it's like, do you want to bet a conference future, or just wait and see and bet one of those teams in the conference championship game if you think that's the way it's going to go? But what do you think about their path and basically a lock to get to the conference championship?
Yeah, I would be curious what their conference champion odds are. I haven't really looked at them a ton. I see that FanDuel has their season wins at 9.5, juice at -170. I make them 10 wins, so it makes a ton of sense. I mean, you hit it nail on head. Every game that's tough, they play at home, and if they're on the road, they have a bye week or a cupcake game before. So I don't know. I think that it's hard to see them losing 3 games. The game that I actually have so I have projection scores for every game this year. And the game that I have the closest, which confused me when I first saw it, is, other than Florida State, I have Florida State as a 6.5 point game. South Carolina on the road, off of a North Carolina game where Clemson should be plenty fine at home, going into South Carolina. Obviously, I think there's going to be like some kind of mental idea that like we're not. If we have the ability, we're putting gas on as much as we can just due to past events. But I have that at an 8-point game. So I think that would be an interesting game to end the year at South Carolina.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that's a game I'm really excited for, coming off the win last year. And it is always a weird spot to have that non-conference rivalry game the last week of the season, because it's exactly what happened to Clemson last year. They already had the conference locked up, or going to the conference championship game locked up. they're kind of looking ahead to how do we get into the college football playoff. And it's your rival. It's not like you're not going to show up for the game, but it's almost like a weird spot for these. Like if Clemson goes into this game, especially if they're like 11-0 and they've kind of dominated, they ended up beating Florida State and winning all these games. And then you're going to South Carolina and you're like, how much does this game really matter to us? Whereas you'll have a South Carolina team who, I mean, regardless of how good of a season they have, they're not going to be going to the SEC championship game. So effectively, this will be the biggest game of their season, is that Clemson game, which it was last year, and we saw what happened. So yeah, I think that could be definitely a spot where they get tripped up again, especially being on the road. It's going to be a crazy environment. But right now, Clemson is plus 155 to win the conference, is the last number I saw. And Florida State's only plus 185. So they're kind of neck and neck in terms of where the odds have them. And like I said, you're probably going to see those two teams in the conference championship game. So we can kind of talk about Florida State a little bit now, and then kind of go into how those two teams will match up in what we assume would be the conference championship game. So obviously Florida State had a big jump last year. Mike Norvell has done a really good job. Like we said, hitting the transfer portal, he's recruited well and kind of gotten them back to a place that Florida State should be based on the brand they have and the recruiting space that they have in Florida and everything. It's been a long time. They haven't been to an ACC conference championship game since Jameis left, which is crazy. It's almost 10 years. They're going to be really good in the trenches on both sides of the ball. They bring a lot back and got some transfers on the offensive line and defensive line. They maybe have the best skill position group. They have Trey Benson, Keon Coleman, Johnny Wilson. Talking about the transfer portal, they got Jaheim Bell, the tight end from South Carolina, who's a stud and really wasn't used very well in the South Carolina system last year. And I think in a better offensive system, he could be a top 5 tight end in all of college football. So they're pretty loaded on offense. I don't see that being an issue for them. I think defensively is maybe where they could slip up, especially in that matchup against Clemson if everything's going right. But I mean, Jordan Travis is getting legit Heisman hype, and I think we're going to find out a lot. First game of the season, obviously they play LSU, who's a top 10 team in the country. So we're going to find out really fast about this Florida State team, just like we did last year when they played LSU the first game of the season. But kind of what do you have on Florida State big picture?
Yeah, obviously, like, don't discredit Florida State by any means. They have a really good team. They have a lot of talent. I've already bet LSU minus 2.5 in week 1. Just think that it's a lot of turnover to try to bring in a team, though they have a ton of talent. Like, to start your year with a team the magnitude of LSU after what Florida State's brought in and lost and tried to just like manipulate and figure out their ways. I think that's a really tough first part of the year. Other than that, I mean, they're going to be the second best team in conference, if not the first. I don't think that those prices you were saying are worth playing for either of these teams. Like, the season's a long season, and if there's things that happen, by all means. The biggest thing for me is I think that there's this like false notion of momentum going in for Florida State. Like, this is a Florida State team who, for a lot of last year, I would watch and just not be very impressed with. Like, there were games at the end of the year that look worse than they were. And if you watch the games, like the Syracuse game, Syracuse threw an interception in the end zone twice, or one was interception, one was a fumble. So that 38-3 is more like 38-21, which is more like probably 34-21, which becomes a lot different than 38-3. Florida, they beat by the hair. They beat Oklahoma in the Pop-Tart Bowl, but I just don't look into that game much. I also don't think Oklahoma was very good. Then you have games like they lost to Clemson. They let Georgia Tech stay in the game for quite some time. They lost to NC State. They lost to Wake Forest. Like, they barely beat Louisville. This is just a team who, like, don't get me wrong, with the talent they brought in this year, they're going to be really good. But I do think that just this notion of they ended the season one of the better teams in the nation. I didn't have them as a top 10 team like year over year. And so I have them at 13 going into this year. I think that that's honestly a pretty good spot. Once their ceiling is definitely higher than 13, and once the talent starts to prove itself, by all means, they'll probably fall into that top 10, top 7 range. But for now, like that's an awful LSU matchup. And the issue is like, let's say you have all these transfers, you come in and you get smacked around by LSU. Then you go out, you beat Southern Miss. No one cares. Like not even the players care. You go play a Boston College team again, just not good. And then you have Clemson on the road. Like you really didn't have enough time to mesh still. Like at week 4, are they still going to be good enough to beat the Clemson team at Clemson? I don't know. Their schedule is pretty tough. So a 2-2 start would not surprise me by any means.
Yeah, I don't think they're beating Clemson in the regular season on the road. I think, and I agree. I'm high on LSU. I bet an LSU future. They're one of my 2 futures that I have. So I'm high on that LSU team. I think they'll beat Florida State week 1. So yeah, I agree that they will start 2-2, and then they very possibly could finish 10-2. Like that wouldn't be surprising either. They have a couple at Pitt is a tough game late in the season that they have. Couple games that they could slip up, but I think they are a team that is definitely a little bit overhyped, like you said. I think because people want Florida State to be good, it's getting a little over exaggerated. And they definitely should be a fun team to watch. Like I said, they have really good skill position players and a quarterback that theoretically should be really good. So it should be fun to watch, but I just don't think they're quite on that level. I don't think they're a college football playoff team, which some people have, not even some, a lot of people have kind of picked them as like a more interesting pick to make the college football playoff. I think that an ideal season for this Florida State team would be realistic season for them would be lose to Clemson and LSU, win out the rest of your games. You're 10-2 in the ACC championship game, and you get a revenge spot at Clemson against Clemson in the ACC championship game, and then hopefully you can beat them there and maybe knock Clemson out of the college football playoff if you win that game and go to a New Year's Six, and that would be a great season for Florida State. So I think that's probably a more realistic season for them than the college football playoff that some people are trying to throw them into.
Yeah, I would agree. I have a question and also just like a comment on their schedule. So the first question is, what do you think the line, like let's just assume it's Florida State, Clemson on a neutral. What would you make that line? I have it at 3.5 Clemson, which I feel like is pretty good. I mean, you have to remember this LSU game is like a semi-neutral. I would say probably closer to neutral than anything because Louisiana really isn't that far away. So 3 there. I think 3.5 Clemson would make a ton of sense to me.
Yeah, I think between 3 and 4. Obviously, if it's the conference championship game, a lot of that will depend on kind of what we see from both teams, because I do think there are question marks, like we've said, about both. Neither are like a sure thing to be an elite team. Like Clemson, new offensive coordinator, even though we think it's a great hire, kind of a new quarterback, even though Klubnik played the last couple of games of the season, in kind of, like we said, not really taking advantage of the transfer portal. Like there are things with Clemson that maybe everything just doesn't click. Florida State, maybe a little too overhyped. They brought in a ton of transfers, which also can be tough to try to get everything to work. So as of now, I think anywhere between 3 and 4 to Clemson would make sense. But by the end of the season, it could be Clemson -7. Wouldn't shock me if Clemson has a much better season than Florida State. So yeah, we're just gonna have to kind of wait and see. I'm hoping that everything works for Florida State, and by the time the end of the season comes around, that'll be a great game between them and Clemson.
Yeah, I agree. And then the second thing is just like when looking at teams, I like to look at like what kind of scheduling or what kind of opponent is this team going to thrive against. I think Florida State is a team that's you talked about it. They have the best like talent pool, and so they're going to be able to. Like you said, that Pitt game is going to be tough. And I think on paper, it does look tough. But there's one thing that I can almost guarantee you, and that's Narduzzi is not going to score points. And so it's like, if you were going to bet Florida State, I think that is a good spot to do it. I don't know how a team with the offensive capabilities that Pittsburgh has shown that they have can keep up with a team like Florida State in basically any case.
Yeah, well, I famously have a a fetish for Phil Jerkovich. So I think they're going to be the best offense in the country. But no, and also that's like I have like a half like analytical gambling brain and a half like dumb college football fan gambling brain. And so the dumb college football fan half is like, I don't know, man, going to Pittsburgh on the road, like you never want to go to Pitt on the road. Like it's always an upset spot. But then yeah, when you look at it on paper, Pitt should not be able to keep up with them in terms of
Yeah,
scoring.
I was looking for a line. Like usually they'll have like best game lines. They don't have this one. I do think it'll be lined a close game. I make it 8. So I think that on paper it looks like it's actually like you're not wrong by any means. I just like situationally there's like games that just are unfortunately not going to work out for like a Pitt. And I think this probably is one. But I say that the Tennessee game last year, complete opposite standard, and it was a similar Tennessee team versus like a similar Florida State team this year. So maybe Pitt has their number on being able to score once a year. So it's possible.
Yeah, but talking about Pitt, not that I think they're quite in this conversation. I think the biggest question in this conference is then who is the third best team? I think the top two have a pretty big gap to everybody else. If you look at the team with the third best odds to win the conference, it's actually Louisville, which I kind of don't know if I agree with, but they do have the third best odds to win the conference. They obviously made a big hire in the offseason, bringing in Jeff Brom, who played at Louisville as a Louisville guy. And I think it's a good hire. They do return 13 starters, so that's not bad. I just think it might be too soon, year one with the new head coach, and bringing in a head coach who's kind of like is a Louisville guy. Like it's not like he's going to get fired if he has 2 bad years. Like he's going to have plenty of time to kind of establish his culture, go get guys in the transfer portal, recruit guys to kind of fit what he wants to do. So I don't think they're in a rush to win a ton of games this season. I think as the year goes on, they definitely could improve. But they also have a pretty favorable schedule, which helps. They do avoid Clemson, UNC, and Miami in conference play. So that's like three of the top 5 teams probably they won't have to play. They get Notre Dame at home, Duke, Virginia Tech, Virginia, all at home. Those are all going to be really winnable games. Their non-conference games are Georgia Tech, Murray State, Indiana. Those are all really winnable games at home. I mean, there's a real scenario if they can beat NC State on the road week 5, looking at their schedule, that they would be 5-0 going into a home game against Notre Dame, which would be pretty exciting. They have Georgia Tech, Murray State, Indiana, Boston College, NC State the first 5 games of the season. So if they could be 5-0 going into that Notre Dame game, that would be really exciting. But what do you kind of see with Louisville and kind of a new era there?
Yeah, I third highest odds like really surprises me. I made this team 41st in the nation. I think that if you have them over North Carolina, then like check your power polls. I don't really agree with that. Louisville, the best thing they have going for them is strength of schedule. You hit it nail on the head. But I mean, then you get to like week 5, right? Week 4, I think 4-0 makes the most sense. But like week 5, NC State's a pretty good team, live dog at home. Yeah, I think that you'll probably get NC State plus 1.5 here. Notre Dame, a team that for years I've been kind of high on, and I hate the fact that I am, but the Notre Dame's definitely the more talented team there. Pittsburgh, tough game. They get a bye week before Duke, which I think really helps them. We will talk about it in a minute, but I think that this Duke team is really good, and their strength of schedule sucks. And so I think that Louisville game is circled on their map that like, hey, like we might be the third best team in conference and win 4 games, but we have to win this Louisville game. So that's an interesting one. I think this Louisville team, like I'm seeing FanDuel at 8.5 wins. I am at like 6.7. So I will be betting a Louisville ceiling or Louisville season win totals under. I don't think this team's great. I have their offense 50th in the nation, defense 28th. And I think that's being kind of generous to the defense, to be honest.
Yeah, I think they're going to be a pretty okay team. They're going to win the games that they should win. They're going to be able to beat Virginia, probably Virginia Tech, Georgia Tech, like Boston College. I think they're just talent wise and coaching wise going to be a level above those teams. But I don't think they're really going to be able to touch the top teams in the conference, like at Miami, Kentucky, even last game of the season. I don't think they're winning any of those games. I think at NC State is probably the most interesting game on their schedule that could probably go either way. Um, but yeah, I totally agree that they are not the third best team in the conference. So those odds were really surprising to me. I guess it really just comes from strength of schedule that they have the third best odds because they avoid a lot of the big teams in the conference. But still, I don't see them winning. Yeah, at Miami or a few of those other games. So
Yeah,
speaking,
just seeing a
yeah, go
nine-win
ahead.
total. 9-win total like blows my mind. Like, can you find 9 wins in this? Like,
No,
I
I
don't know.
think
I actually hadn't looked at the win total, so sorry to like, keep cutting you off, but like seeing that high is surprising. Like, there's a lot of teams that just slip your mind when there's 130 teams looked at, but like 9, I cannot give them 9 wins.
no, I think 8 is probably their ceiling when I look at it. Like I said, I think say they go get that game against NC State, even that would put them at 5-0. Even though it's at home, I don't think they would be beating Notre Dame. And then Virginia Tech, Virginia, that would put them at 7 wins. And then if they win maybe one of the Pitt or Duke game, that would still put them at 8 wins. And I don't see them winning at Miami or Kentucky the last 2 games. So I think if everything goes great for them, and that is me giving them the NC State game on the road and one of the Pitt or Duke games, that still only puts them at 8 wins. And that would be like a
Yeah.
great year if they could win all those games. So in year one with a new coach, like that would be a success in my mind. So yeah, I think that's a pretty wild number. Um,
Yeah, I think an 8-win Pitt or 8-win Louisville team goes home, they go to a decent bowl game, and they're very happy with themselves.
yeah, and that would give a first year head coach the kind of momentum you want going into a second season. So yeah, I like the win total under, but um, I don't necessarily not like the team. But yeah, that just seems like they're kind of putting their expectations too high. And the only thing I can think is based off of kind of a weak strength of schedule. But other than that, there's not really much to be excited about other than some decent returning experience. Um, but yeah, I agree that UNC is the third best team in the conference, and I'm guessing the odds are only that way because they do have a bit of a tougher schedule. Obviously, Drake May is a top 5 quarterback in the country. He's going to be one of the Heisman contenders all year, barring injuries or anything like that. I think one interesting thing with Drake May and UNC, they did lose their offensive coordinator, Phil Longo, who just kind of turned their offense into a bit of a powerhouse with Sam Howell and then Drake May last year. It went to Wisconsin, which was an amazing hire for Wisconsin. I think that's a huge move for them with Luke Fickell kind of running the defense and Longo running the offense there. But schedule wise, they do avoid Florida State, which is nice, but they by no means have an easy schedule. Their first 2 games of the season, South Carolina on a neutral, which is going to be a tough game. Appalachian State, which is always a tough out of conference game. Even Minnesota, I don't think Minnesota's very good, but having a Big Ten team out of conference like does not like those first 3 games out of conference are going to be 3 tests. None of them are gimme out of conference games. Then they have to go to at Pitt after that. They play Miami. They play Duke. They have to go to Clemson and to NC State the last 2 games of the season. So I do like this team. I think their offense is going to be really good. Um, Drake May is going to be a stud. They got a stud wide receiver transfer, Devontae Walker from Kent State, who the Kent State offense last year was one of the most exciting offenses in college football. And It's the reason he was able to transfer to North Carolina. Walker is going to be a monster. So they should be really fun to watch. They should be the third most talented team in the conference for sure. I think the only thing that is kind of going against them is their strength of schedule. So what do you see with UNC?
Yeah, North Carolina is a weird team. I think nobody can argue that Drake May is good. But I will say I said this last year, and I kind of got some backlash for it. I don't think that he's what everybody makes him out to be. Like, I keep hearing these people rank North Carolina's offense in their top 10, top 5 just due to Drake May. And just go watch his highlights one day. Don't get me wrong. He has great awareness. He's decently fast and quicker than you would imagine. But I think that a lot of these plays he's making that like a pretty good quarterback could make. Like I'm just not mesmerized by what he does. Also, I think the one piece that everyone sleeps on is Josh Downs last year was incredible to watch. Like he would bail them out of so many plays just because he would run his route and then he's fast enough to get back into just like a spot and be open. And so it was like a bailout spot, like how Patrick Mahomes has Travis Kelce. Like he said, "Oh man, like we don't have anything, throw the thing up," and Travis Kelce will figure it out. Josh Downs was kind of that for North Carolina offense, which you need, and I'm sure that they can fill those gaps and find a void and find another guy that is that. But I think that comes down a lot to coaching and just to be in the right system. So is he not the second quarterback in the nation? No, I do still think he's good, but I do think that people are rushing to say that this offense is great. I have them 19th in the nation. I thought that was decently fair. But then the defense fall off is like, man, I have their defense 67th. And so I don't know. North Carolina, they have a lot of holes. I think that this is a team that no one wants to face. But then you could also lose. Like if they lost to an NC State at NC State, I would not be shocked. And then that would be shocking. But if they beat Clemson at Clemson, I don't think they win that game, but it wouldn't be surprising if they made this game a much faster pace, a much higher scoring game than everybody's expecting. So it's one of those dark horses that's like never check North Carolina off, but I do think that their offense is near like the 20s and their defense is not good. So I think that there's one better team than North Carolina. They should fill that 3 spot, and we can talk about that. But the North Carolina strength of schedule, they will go down as the 3 spot just due to the fact that my guys that we're going to talk about in a second, they got a short end of the stick this year.
Yeah, I agree with you on Drake May. I'm not a huge Drake May believer. He's definitely not top 3 quarterback in the country, just off the top of my head. Maybe 4 or 5 is where he could slide in. Obviously, Caleb Williams would be number 1 for me, and then maybe Michael Penix number 2 for me, but that's probably just me. But yeah, I mean, I don't think he's winning the Heisman for sure. I would not go there. And I do think, I mean, it's very possible that losing the offensive coordinator could make a difference because this offense has been really, really good for a long time, kind of doing the same thing. So that'll be interesting to see kind of how everything clicks with their offense. But I feel like I can't go any further without just letting you talk about Duke. You seem really ready to talk about Duke. So yeah, they weren't the next team on my list, but I think it's time to talk about Duke.
Yeah, unfortunately, Duke, they run into a very fast brick wall. This strength of schedule, man. They get Clemson week 1. They didn't slow down out of the gate for 1 second. I think Duke brings a ton of talent. I think they have one of the better quarterbacks in the ACC. I have their offense 40th in the nation, defense 50th, and I have as we take down into season, I've slowly brought those down. I think that I'm probably not high enough on this team. From a talent perspective, I think Duke is the 3rd best team in the ACC. The issue and the reason that their season win total is 6.5. Clemson, then they get Notre Dame, they have NC State, they have Florida State, Louisville at Louisville, North Carolina on the road, and Pittsburgh, which is at home. They got everybody that they could ask for. They got the whole ACC. I don't think they have Miami, which is basically all that they have. But I think that this team, we saw the coaching transition, how big of a difference it made. I have a friend who played at Duke for the last 4 years at this point. He's at the Giants now, so he's out there with you. But he was talking about who's their coach for the last 100 years. I can't remember his name off the top of my head. Duke's coach. An older.
The Manning guy.
No, I can't remember. It was an older guy, but he said that he would literally just toss in skill position coach. It's Mike Elko. Oh, David Cutcliffe. There we go. Cutcliffe would just put guys that he liked and he enjoyed in skill position spots so that they could find jobs at other places. He was like, yo, our wide receiver coach had never played receiver. He had never coached wide receivers. He was a cornerback coach, and they didn't need a cornerback coach, so they put him a receiver coach. And he was like, it was just ran miserable. So when Mike Elko came in last year, completely 360 changed this program around. They looked good, and I don't think that they're done yet. Now you get an entire offseason with Elko, and I think they have the talent, they have the pieces. The issue is they have a really miserable schedule. So I'll be looking to back Duke in especially week 3 Northwestern. I don't think you can put a number high enough just due to Northwestern's issues. Then they have UConn. And again, like how I was saying with that Louisville game, is they need these wins. To get to 7 wins, they have to beat Louisville at Louisville. The issue is that's after a Florida State game. They have NC State at home off of a bye. I think that's a really good spot. So just a few good spots, but overall, the issue with Duke is just a strength of schedule thing. I do think they're a talented team who can beat up a Pittsburgh, who can beat up a Wake Forest, teams like this. And just unfortunately, they don't have enough firepower in them to get to the conference championship by any means. So I think still North Carolina is the 3 spot, but Duke has to be 4 in my ratings.
Yeah, I agree. I wish that they had a more achievable schedule, because otherwise they would be, I think, a much more hyped team. I think Riley Leonard is really, really good. He's maybe one of the most underrated quarterbacks in the country. I would guess most people that don't follow college football closely wouldn't know who that is. He had a great year last year. And yeah, I think the team is really good. It's just this, like you said, I mean, the schedule is brutal. I wish they had Clemson later in the season, and I think that could be a more exciting game hosting Clemson if they had a few weeks to kind of work things out. But that's a brutal week 1 schedule, week 1 matchup. I think maybe the most exciting game for them is that they get to host Notre Dame week 5. I think that could be a huge win if they were able to win that game in kind of establishing their season. And like you said, other than that, I think Florida State on the road is really tough. North Carolina on the road is obviously exciting, rivalry game. But other than that, I think they definitely could win every other game on their schedule. They just kind of have to take care of business. But I agree with you against Northwestern and maybe even UConn, even Virginia, these teams that are skill level way below them could be games that are priced a little bit lower, but Duke will actually be able to show what they can do in those games and could kind of blow some of those teams out. So that's a good thing to look for.
Yeah, I think the best resort would be a Duke get blown out by every good team too, and then we get a Duke +6 versus Pitt at Pitt or something, and they fooled you into thinking that they were bad again. But no, I think this Duke team's pretty good.
Yeah, even the Northwestern game you talked about, if they get blown out by Clemson week 1, then they play Lafayette, who's an FCS team, so people aren't going to take it seriously. Could get a decent line against Northwestern, and like you said, they could just put up 100 points against Northwestern. So I kind of have NC State, Miami, and Pitt all kind of in the same group. I think Miami's maybe the most talented team in that group, but really the way things fall, any of those teams could kind of fall ahead of each other. Just going based off odds to win the conference, NC State would be next. They're a little bit ahead of Miami. It's an interesting year for NC State. Obviously, Devin Leary has kind of been the face of that team the last couple of years, and he has transferred to Kentucky, which is, I think, one of the more interesting transfers of the season. If things can kind of click with him at Kentucky, even though they haven't really worked out for any quarterbacks at Kentucky, that would be interesting. But then they bring in Brennan Armstrong, who's been the quarterback at UVA the last couple of years and led FBS in passing yards in 2021. And everybody was like, oh, who is this guy? He's a stud. And then in 2022, last year, had a really bad season. But some people are chalking that up to the offensive coordinator, who in 2021, when he led FBS in passing yards, was Robert Anai, who NC State has now hired as their offensive coordinator, which is kind of the reason for Armstrong transferring there. So you're kind of reuniting those two guys who had a pretty magical season in 2021. So offensively, there's a chance that things could click with bringing those two guys back together. And there's also a chance that Brennan Armstrong kind of had one lucky season in 2021 where everything went really well for him, and we're not going to see those results again this year. So kind of what do you see with NC State and see where things go for them?
Yeah, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I believe that 2021 team had 3 receivers over 6'4". I believe. I could be wrong. I know that they were there at some point. I'm pretty sure it's 2021. I give all testament to Brennan Armstrong's success to those receivers. That might sound harsh. If you've watched this man play football, he's like a bad Phil, like your guy. Boston College really didn't have receivers. Phil was just a tank who would get hit and could find pieces. Brennan Armstrong is a tank. Don't get me wrong. The issue is, I think that he could only find pieces due to the fact that he had 3 guys that were 6'4". So when you get hit and you chunk up an absolute volleyball, it's much easier to catch if you're the tallest guy in the entire field. And I think if you watched last year, it would kind of agree to that statement. There were short passes. They were too long in the pocket. And I think that once he gets to a spot in an ACC, which has very good defenses, I don't think, A, he's going to have enough time to do that. B, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets hurt. We saw NC State have injury issues in quarterback all year. And I don't think it's due to any reason other than the fact that there's some pretty tough defenses. And I genuinely don't think that Brennan Armstrong is the best quarterback in this quarterback staple. I think MJ Morris last year did plenty to prove himself. I can't believe that there's not a talk about a battle. It makes sense because coordinator and Armstrong, yada, yada. I understand. But MJ Morris came out when he was not expected to come out and do well, and he did pretty decent. So Brennan Armstrong, few interceptions game 1 when he just tosses them up to the turkeys. Maybe he gets hurt, and then MJ Morris comes in. I think NC State becomes a better team once that happens.
Yeah, I don't think he's good at all. They did get DJ Collins transferred in, who's a wide receiver from Clemson, who is 6'4", so he meets the requirements. So they can maybe get a couple of jump balls there that work out. But yeah, I think over the course of the season, I'd be surprised if he was the starting quarterback when the season ended. It's really just about how much time it takes for that move to get made. In terms of their schedule, they go to UConn their first game, and then have Notre Dame at home. So an interesting first 2 games. And then their schedule kind of slows down a bit. VMI, Virginia, Louisville at home, Marshall at home. Kind of slows down a little bit. And then they go to Duke, which is a game we just talked about. And then Clemson, Miami, at Wake Forest, at Virginia Tech, North Carolina. So the second half of the schedule really ramps up for them and gets really tough. So I think there's a chance they probably lose that Notre Dame game, but they could cruise through the first 6 games at 5-1 and look like things are going pretty decent. And then all of a sudden, if they lose to Duke in that game that we were talking about, could kind of then hit a brick wall, and maybe that Virginia Tech game is the only one they win the entire second half. So I think it's going to be kind of a story of 2 halves of the season. And I think we could also see the quarterback change kind of come in there when the schedule starts to get tough, and that might expose Brennan Armstrong a little bit more. The only thing that gives me faith in this team is just Dave Doran has just been ridiculously consistent his entire tenure at NC State. I mean, their win totals at 6.5 right now, I think. And he's won 7+ games, 8 out of 10 years at NC State. So he's consistently just been in that range where he's winning 7 or more games. That's really the only reason I could give why you would look at the over win total for them. I think the win total is about right. Because like I said, I think they'll probably start the season 5-1. And then after that, things are going to get really tough. Maybe they win that Duke game. They probably win the Virginia Tech game. Maybe they win the Wake Forest game. But I think they're probably going to end up 6 or 7 wins. So I don't really have a strong feel either way for them. I think that's about right.
Yeah, I agree. What a crappy position to be in, to bet an over 6.5, give 5 wins in the first 6, and then not cover, which seems possible.
Yeah.
But I think that more often than not, he probably squeaks out a win or 2 at the end. But yeah, I mean, tough end of schedule for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they probably, if I had to guess, would end on 7 again. It would go 5-1, beat Wake Forest and Virginia Tech, and make it 7, and that would make it 9 out of 11 years, which is really impressive for Dave Doran for kind of what he's done there. But yeah, I don't think they're a strong feel either way on the win total, and I don't think they're a team that could somehow sneak into the conference championship game. So looking at Miami, Miami's always one of the more interesting teams to talk about because they always seem to have the preseason hype. They did last year. Bringing in Mario Cristobal was obviously the biggest hire of the offseason last year. And going into last year, Tyler Van Dyke had all this legitimate Heisman hype people were talking about, which I'm happy to say that I was not getting at all at the time. And he had a really disappointing season last year. Obviously, the whole team did, but him individually took a major step back from what he did in 2021. The one thing that they've done really well with this offseason is the transfer portal. They're number 7 in the nation in the transfer portal rankings, which would be second best in the conference after Florida State. So they've done really well there, and they decided to kind of start from scratch and bring in 2 brand new coordinators. They brought in Shannon Dawson at OC, who has been at Houston doing the air raid with Dana Holgerson. So he's going to try to bring a bit more of that vertical passing attack with him. They brought in Lance Guidry, who is the defensive coordinator at Marshall the last couple of years and has done a really good job at Marshall, establishing a really good defensive system. So I like both their coordinator hires. But I think bringing in 2 brand new coordinators, still only year 2 for the head coach, even though they've done well in the transfer portal, bringing in all these different transfers, in addition to them having a pretty tough schedule, which we can look through in a minute. But I think they'll have a bit of a bounce back year from what was kind of just a disaster last season. I think they'll definitely be improved, but I don't think they're ready to make kind of that jump yet, even to being the 3rd best team in this conference.
Yeah, I agree. I think 7 wins makes a ton of sense here. I'm kind of anti Van Dyke. But I will say I don't think that it was him. I bet on Miami way too much last year, and it was not enjoyable. But they had, and you hit it perfectly. Like the 2 coordinator hires were absolutely on point for this team. I don't think I've seen many hires that were better, because if you watch the offense last year, they didn't have a single play that was past 15 yards drawn up. Like if there was a scheme for, it was only curl routes, slants, and little screen passes, which gives Van Dyke no ability to be good, first off. And second, it allows defenses to collapse completely. So I think they shot themselves in the foot there. The coordinator will be the most important part. Can Van Dyke be good with a new coordinator? I still think just from his mechanics and how he was reading the field, I still think no. So that week 2 game versus Texas A&M screams at me. I think that we'll probably have a little bit too much Miami hype, and that is a tough game to play week 2. But overall, Miami's going to be better. It's hard to be worse than you were last year with the talent that you have. So I think 7 wins makes a ton of sense here.
Yeah. They do also, this is a notable game, they do have the Miami Bowl week 1. They play against Miami, Ohio. I wish I had the stat on the last time those 2 teams played each other. It'd be interesting. But the Miami Bowl week 1, and then the Texas A&M game, I think they could be a bit out of their league there. And then they do get the top 3 teams in the conference, with North Carolina on the road, Florida State on the road, Clemson at home. They have to go to NC State. So a bit of a tough run on the schedule. But I think we definitely see improvement, and like we both agree that those coordinator hires were a hit, and I think Miami will start moving in the right direction. I don't know how far Mario Cristobal will be able to take them nationally, but in terms of what they're doing right now with the transfer portal and the hires they've made, I think they're definitely moving in the right direction. And the bigger NIL and the transfer portal gets, which I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. Obviously, Miami is going to be really successful there because guys are always going to want to play at Miami, no matter what kind of product we see on the field. And the amount of money they're going to be able to offer people is going to be pretty insane. So, yeah, I think 7 wins probably looks about right, like you said. Which I think their win total is 7.5, but juiced pretty heavily towards the under. So I think that probably looks about right for Miami. But I don't know if everything clicks for them. We could see an interesting game. Like they play Florida State late in the season. Maybe if everything's going right for them, that could be a chance for them to kind of cement their season with a big upset win against a Florida State or something like that. But I think kind of the top quarter of the conference would be a good place for them to finish. If they can be the 4th best team, that would be a good season for them.
Yeah, high tier 2, I feel like is a good spot.
Yeah. So that's it for Miami. So the last team kind of in this group before we hit a big drop off in talent level to the kind of basement dwellers of this conference is Pittsburgh. We've already talked about them a few times just with teams that they're matched up with. Phil Jerkovich transferred in from Boston College. He's, like you kind of mentioned, and I talked about earlier, he's been an interesting character in college football over the last couple of years. He's another guy that I think the same as Armstrong, actually, in 2021 had a really good season and kind of started getting this hype around him. And then last year, he had a terrible year, and BC as a team had a terrible year. I don't think you can totally put it on him. Their offensive line was one of the worst offensive lines in college football last year, at least in Power 5. It was miserable. He was just getting hit every single play. They were a pretty hard product to watch. But I think this is going to be a better fit for him. Pitt is always a really well-coached team, which goes a long way in college football. I don't think he was a part of a very well-coached team at Boston College. And I do think they have a decent group of skill position players. They have a decent running back in Rodney Hammond, who's going to have to replace a ton of production. I'm not even going to attempt to say his name because I always mess it up. But Izzy was the running back at Pitt last year. Was maybe the best running back in the country last year. Definitely top 5. Is now in the NFL. He's actually a Jet, which I'm excited about. I think he could be a hit as a late round draft pick. But I think they're going to be pretty decent. It's just probably going to come down to the quarterback play. The defense is always pretty solid. Narduzzi just coaches up the defense kind of regardless of the talent level. Just his system has kind of worked for a few years straight now. That's kind of gotten their defense to a certain consistent level every year. So I think it's really going to be the quarterback play that determines whether they're like the 4th best team in the conference or like the 8th best team in the conference. And I think they really could fall anywhere in there. So what do you see with Pitt?
Yeah, it's funny you say that. This is actually the team with the biggest ceiling and floor that I have, like just the gap in between. I have their ceiling at 8.5 wins. I think an 8-win season, if they play perfect, does make a lot of sense. And I have their floor at 3 wins, which is rough due to the strength schedule. But like, I think that if Phil comes out and he's the Boston College guy we saw last year, 3 is, I still don't think it's possible, genuinely. But because they win, they're not. I think 4 is probably a better number. These are all automated, so I would say 4 being their floor. But the big thing for me here is we talked about Phil being this like hard hitting, like thick skinned guy, and I think that that's really his downfall, which sounds crazy, but just looking at an article, you can just type in Jerkovic injured, and it says Phil's in concussion protocol. He's got a whole bunch of other injuries he's fighting to come back from. I think that he's going to play next week, but his knee looks really bad. And it's like, okay, like, so you have a miserable offense. You don't have talented receivers that are fast enough to get you any kind of space. Your running back is going to lose a yard at max, and yet you're still going to play with a concussion and a hurt knee. Like, you're better off just letting in a guy that's not hurt be in there and be able to like make a play. I don't think that he is to blame for the Boston College errors, except for kind of he is. Like, if you have to be mobile and you're hurt, don't be the quarterback. And so I think that him being tough skinned has kind of been a downfall to his. Also, it's a great thing to watch. It makes you have to love this kid. And the good thing for him at Pitt is I don't think that he's going to have to do that. So if he comes into the season healthy and he somehow doesn't get hurt in the first week, then by all means, I think that he has really high upside.
Yeah, like I said, I'm a huge fan of him just because I bet him a ton that year in 2021, and he's really exciting to watch. And he had a really good year. And this is another situation like we were talking about with NC State, where it's kind of with these transfers, he's trying to reunite with his offensive coordinator. Frank Signetti Jr. was the offensive coordinator at BC in 2021 when he had a really good year. Signetti left for the Pitt offensive coordinator job last year in 2022. There was a new offensive coordinator in BC when he had his bad season. So he's kind of reuniting there. Frank Signetti Jr. has been an offensive coordinator in the NFL. He's been a quarterback coach in the NFL. So he's a legit offensive coordinator there at Pitt. So them being back together, maybe everything kind of works out for Phil. I hope it does. But I do think schedule-wise, just looking at their schedule really quick, things kind of break their way in terms of having an easier schedule towards the beginning of the year. They get UNC at home, which I think could be an interesting game. If they can somehow beat UNC at home, there's a legit chance that they're 7-0 going into that game against Notre Dame. I think they're going to beat Cincinnati and West Virginia, non-conference, getting Cincinnati at home. I think they'll beat Virginia Tech on the road, Louisville at home. I think they'll beat Wake Forest. So if they can beat North Carolina, even if they lose to North Carolina, that would put them at 6-1 going into that Notre Dame game. And then kind of like what we talked about, then they have Notre Dame, Florida State, at Duke, some tougher games down the stretch. But I do think there's a scenario where this team wins 8 games, maybe even 9 games if everything goes perfectly for them. So yeah, I think they'll definitely be an exciting team to watch, regardless of what we get. They're going to be able to hang with some good teams, and they might have some stinkers against teams that they probably should beat pretty easily. So should be an exciting team to watch. Do you have anything else on Pitt before we move on?
Yeah, I think the North Carolina game, I have Pitt losing by 0.2 of a point. So that'll be a really good game.
Yeah.
The Louisville game will be interesting just because it's off of bye and it's at home. I don't know. I think they do have high upside. And honestly, I hope that they are somehow 7-0 or 7-1, 8-0 heading into that Florida State game. This is a team that just feels like Pitt and Narduzzi have always had this underlying like quality like by them. So like I think that if they start 7-1, we start to see the markets really think that this Pittsburgh team is probably better than they are. Their schedule lining up into that Florida State game isn't a toss-up, but it's not tough by any means. Like if we get Pitt versus Notre Dame is an 8-point favorite. I would probably take Notre Dame. If we can get Pitt, Florida State under 10, by all means. And I think that lines up to be possible. And it wouldn't surprise me if we actually can see these games come to fruition just due to the start of the schedule.
Yeah, no, that would be exciting hype-wise for Pitt, but then also, yeah, it'd be good for us to take advantage of the market, kind of going against that early hype off of an easy schedule. But so now there are a few teams that we take a huge drop off, kind of 6 teams that are way further down the list. Surprisingly, one of them is Wake Forest, because Wake Forest has been a really good team the past couple of years. They obviously had Sam Hartman, which is a big reason for their success over the last couple of years, has been one of the best quarterbacks in college football, and now transferred to Notre Dame. The new quarterback, Mitch Griffiths, he's a sophomore. He made 1 start last year, week 1, when Sam Hartman was coming back from his medical issue, and he played pretty well, but it was against I think an FCS team. I think it was against VMI. Can't remember off the top of my head, but not a big time opponent, but he played decent. I mean, he learned under a really good college football quarterback in Sam Hartman. So obviously a huge question mark though with a sophomore quarterback that's only made one start. They bring back a decent amount in the trenches, which is really the only good thing I can say about them. They have 7 out of 9 starting linemen coming back between the two sides of the ball. And then with a team that's already going to be kind of in limbo, especially at the quarterback position, they also just kind of got the short end of the stick scheduling wise. They have to go to Clemson. They have Florida State. They have Pitt. They have NC State. They have to go to Duke, to Notre Dame. So just a really tough schedule. I think they have a good chance of losing that game against Vanderbilt week 2. So I think a lot of things are kind of going against them. And if they can kind of get 6 wins and get out of there and make a bowl game, I think that would be a fine season for them with what they have.
Yeah, Wake is really good at developing talent too. So I think it's hard to really put a number on them. I hope that they beat Vandy, but I can't see that. I mean, I hope Vandy beats them. I can't see that happening. But I love me some Vanderbilt. That's my squad. But yeah, the biggest issue for me is Mitch Griffiths. I'm really big into a proponent of this idea of if you give somebody all the intangibles, then by all means, a college coach can probably make them good. Mitch Griffiths is 5'11", and so have we seen really short quarterbacks be good? Yes, we have. Is he talented enough to do that? Maybe. I have no clue, but I think that it already starts him in a worse spot than he could be. Like Bryce Young, very short, a phenomenal arm and IQ. Does Mitch Griffiths have that? I don't know. We'll see. I think you'll be able to see very early on. And then just scrolling through their quarterback range, other than him, I don't think that they have very many good arms. So I think that it's a downside thing here more than upside. And also, I give their offense, even with knowing all that, I give their offense 36th in the nation. I think that their offensive line is pretty solid. I have their defense 84th in the nation. Maybe that's being a little bit too tough because Pitt's always going to be okay defensively. But yeah, I think it's a downside year, if anything. So I would lean towards unders on everything. But the market kind of agrees. 6.5 win total juice to the under, pretty heavy. I think 6 wins, 5 wins makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. I think I probably am being optimistic thinking about Vanderbilt winning that game, especially on the road.
I hope.
But it's definitely a game that if you're going to be betting Wake Forest the rest of the year to pay attention to, because even though it's Vanderbilt, seeing kind of what Mitch Griffiths does against an SEC defense will probably tell you a lot about what he'll be able to do against ACC defenses the rest of the year. If he looks good against Vanderbilt, then maybe they're going to have more upside than we think. But if he kind of struggles against the size and speed that even a Vanderbilt defense has, then maybe it will be more towards the downside. Yeah.
Yeah. What's funny is we were kind of laugh this off as you're talking about the team, but there's a definite tier 1 of this conference, Florida State, Clemson. There's a definite tier 2, I would say North Carolina, Duke, toss in Miami, Pitt. And then tier 3, I only have one team on tier 3, and that is only Wake Forest. I think that they can almost fight to tier 2, not good enough, and they're not as bad as tier 4. But man, this ACC drop off to where I assume we're going next, it gets bad fast.
Yeah, very fast. We probably won't have too much on these teams because it starts to get really ugly. The next team that I have is Syracuse. Their win total is also at 6.5, heavily juiced to the under. It might even be 6 by now. But I can't even check there. I just was looking on FanDuel and realized that I'm not allowed to bet New York college teams, so it won't even tell me what their win total is on FanDuel, which is so annoying. But they lost both of their coordinators. They're going to have 2 brand new coordinators at Syracuse. They lost Sean Tucker, who was their stud running back. That was a huge part of their success. Garrett Schrader had a really good year at quarterback for Syracuse last year. But I think losing the offensive coordinator is going to hurt. I think he really thrived in the system that they had last year. And I read something saying that the new coordinators coming in like are on both sides of the ball. Their plan is to try to like run the exact same systems that they ran last year, which I think is almost like a bad thing. Like you get hired as a coordinator, come do your own thing, and if it takes a year or two, then it takes a year or two. But I think that's a weird move to be like, yeah, we're just going to try to stick with, especially, I mean, it's Syracuse. It's not like they were winning national championships, and let's try to keep that going. But they also have a bad schedule for a team that is already going to be in a tough spot. They have Army out of conference, which I always think is one of the worst teams you can schedule out of conference. Even if you beat Army, you're not going to feel good the next few days after playing Army because it's just such a physical game, such a physical matchup. The way Army plays, you're kind of setting yourself up to be potentially upset with how few possessions are in those games. But then other than that, their schedule's weird. They only have 3 conference home games, and one of them is against Clemson, which is a loss. So they really only have like 2 winnable games in the conference. They go to Purdue out of conference, which is kind of a weird game. But then other than that, I mean, they're at North Carolina, at Florida State. Some of their more winnable games, Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, they have to play on the road. So really, they're only winnable home conference games like Boston College and maybe Wake Forest, but I don't even see them beating Wake Forest. So I think it's going to be a tough year for Syracuse.
Yeah, especially just with all the headache. They lost coordinators, and then Laquan Allen is potentially being suspended. He's suing the school to see if he can appeal and play. And it's like, okay, like let's just say even you can play. It's just a weird dynamic within the locker room to sue the school so that you can play football. I don't know. They don't have a talented enough team to be missing him or to be missing anybody. I think an injury across like any position, their secondary players now can be exposed into that tier 4 list. Like, what is their backup guard for Syracuse? I just don't think that they're quality enough at all. So if they're losing Laquan Allen to like being suspended for the season, by all means, and then they're just a mess waiting to happen. So I tend to agree. Unders here, I could almost make this a tier 3 team just due to quarterback quality, but I'm not going to. I think that the very highest of tier 4, I think that they can beat teams like a Georgia Tech, like a Virginia Tech, like a Virginia. But then I don't think that they stand chances versus a Pitt or a Wake Forest.
No, I agree. I think it's going to be tough for them. And yeah, the reason they only have 3 conference home games is that game against Pitt is going to be at Yankee Stadium, regular season game, which is
That's pretty cool.
Which should be interesting because obviously they play the bowl game there every year, but I don't think they've played a regular season game there before. They scheduled it for November, but the Yankees won't be playing in October anyways, so they could have scheduled it a month sooner if they wanted to. So the next team on the list, you could go either way, Virginia Tech or Boston College. I have Virginia Tech, just a little bit above Boston College. It's year 2 for Brent Pry at Virginia Tech. Last year, their offense was a disaster. It's one of the worst offenses in Power 5. They brought in Grant Wells at quarterback last year from Marshall, who had been really solid at Marshall, and he was just a disaster last year. I don't put all the blame on him. He wasn't good, but just everything they tried to do was just it was just really bad. It was really hard to watch. It was not what you expect from a Virginia Tech team that over decades has been so consistent and at least is going to a bowl game, getting 6 wins, competing against some of these teams like Miami, North Carolina. You think, oh, going to Virginia Tech, like that's going to be a really tough game. That was not the case at all last year. So it's a weird spot for Virginia Tech. They're another team that falls into the same win total range at like 5.5, although it is pretty juiced to the under. I think the best thing I would say about this team is that they have a really experienced offensive line. All 5 starters on the offensive line are coming back from starting a lot of games last year. So that's good, but their quarterback situation is pretty up in the air. Like I said, Grant Wells was really bad, and they got a transfer in from Baylor, Kyron Drones, who's more of a dual threat, really athletic quarterback. So I would guess Grant Wells is going to end up starting the year. I'd be really surprised if he finished the year. I've read a few things about Drones, the transfer from Baylor, being a guy that they'll want to bring in to try to mix things up and make their offense more dynamic, because what we saw from their offense last year was a disaster.
Yeah, this is one of the more interesting teams in Power 5 due to the fact that like they suck. I have them 84th, which is one worse than Ohio. I think Ohio would be a favorite in a game on a neutral field, which is crazy to say. They played
Curtis
Marshall
Rourke would cut him up.
Curtis
Rourke would throw for like 300 yards.
I think Ohio's going to be a pretty good team this year. But
yeah, I love that team.
Yeah, but Marshall, and this pains me to say, I have Marshall as a touchdown favorite versus Virginia Tech, which is just crazy to think about. Granted, I need to look deeper into my Marshall football IQ, but yeah, as of now, I have 6.8. I don't think this is a good team. 5.5, I would love the under, but it's too much juice to lay. I have them at 3.9 wins, so I think sometimes 5 wins if they can beat a Marshall, if they can beat a Boston College at Boston College. I think that 5 wins makes a ton of sense, but I don't see 6 by any means.
No, I think if you were to bet it, you would have to go to the under. Like you said, I think it's like minus 150 to the under. Let's see, I have it up right here. It's minus 148 to under 5.5 wins at FanDuel. So yeah, it's pretty juiced, but there's no way you can bet this team to win 6 games. That's insane. So yeah, I don't really have much more on them, and that will be a Grant Wells revenge game against Marshall. So that's interesting. Week 4.
I think at 148, I actually might bet that at 5.5. I'm weird. I lay a lot of juice on win totals. If it's just something I don't think is like I just lay it like as we were on this show. Took that Louisville we talked about. Is it 152, I believe, and that's like I think that there's almost no way Louisville has 9 wins. So by all means, 8.5, 152. 148, I'll probably come look back at this after this, but I think that 5.5 minus 148 is pretty good bet.
Yeah, it feels hard sometimes to lay that juice, and then you look at the schedule and you're like, where is this team winning 6 games? Like, I should not be worried about the juice. So the other team that's kind of around the same level as them in terms of win total, at least, is Boston College, who's also at 5.5 wins on their win total, and it's pretty even both directions actually. So this team's interesting. Obviously, they lost their quarterback. We just talked about Phil is gone. The new quarterback stepping in is Emmett Moorhead, who has been at BC. He started 4 games last year when Phil was hurt, and played okay. He actually beat NC State starting at quarterback 1 game last year, which was like a top 20 team at the time when they beat NC State. So he played all right in 4 games. So I think there's a chance he could be a decent quarterback, and they're actually 8th in the country in returning production, which seems good. The problem is that they're returning production. They have a lot of really bad players. Like I said, just their offensive line was horrible last year. They didn't have a lot of great skill position players, which was another reason that, like you were saying, Phil's style of football, kind of throwing the ball up in the air and having guys try to make plays, didn't work out because they didn't have a lot of weapons. They're just not a very good team. Their schedule actually isn't as tough as some other teams in the ACC that we've talked about. So things break their way a little bit, which is why we see the win total at 5.5 and not lower, because honestly, based on their talent, they could easily be below that. But I mean, their out of conference games are Northern Illinois, Holy Cross. They have UConn at home. Like those are really winnable games. They have to go to Army, which I said, I don't know why all these teams are scheduling Army. It's such a terrible out of conference game to schedule, but they get Virginia at home, Georgia Tech. They get Virginia Tech at home. So the schedule does kind of break their way. They don't have to play Clemson. So they don't have to play North Carolina. So the schedule kind of breaks their way a bit, which should help. But I don't know. There's just not a lot of talent on this team.
Yeah, there's a lot of teams that you should look at returning production and just toss in the garbage and wish that it was at 0%. And I think this is one of those teams. The issue is like, if we agree that Phil is a pretty good quarterback and has solid stuff, then like he couldn't make that offense work. And they had Zay Flowers. Zay Flowers is a pretty high draft pick, really good receiver. He couldn't make it work. What makes you think any production is going to make it work? And so they might have a high returning production, but they lose probably the two most important pieces of that entire team. So I agree. I think that they might get to this win total just due to the fact they have some cupcake games. And so that's like the only upside that they have. I have them worse than San Jose State and Rutgers, which speaks volumes to where I have this Boston College team.
Yeah, the win total is interesting just because their schedule basically breaks down where they have teams that it's hard to see them losing those games, and then they have games where it's pretty impossible to see them winning, and then it's basically like at Syracuse and at Georgia Tech and at Army, like those games will kind of determine whether they hit 6 wins or not. And I don't think it's worth trying to play it in either direction. I think it'd be a nice season for them if they could hit 6 wins and make a bowl game, but I'm not investing anything in this team, and probably even week to week, I don't see myself getting in on this team at all.
Yeah, I agree.
So now we're going even further down the list here. Next team is Georgia Tech. They're in an interesting spot. Brent Key, it's technically his first year as head coach. He took over as the interim head coach last year and actually did a pretty good job. They went 4-4 after he took over last season, after they'd had a disastrous start to the season, which you can always kind of chalk up to that mid-season change. Players get hyped up over the change of the interim head coach and kind of ride off that. They are bringing in Haynes King at quarterback, who was at Texas A&M, was the week 1 starting quarterback for Texas A&M, and things didn't really work out for him. They return a decent amount on the line on both sides, and I think the nicest thing I could say about this Georgia Tech team is I don't think they're the worst team in the ACC, and that's the nice thing I'm going to say about Georgia Tech. But what do you got?
Yeah, Pyron's not an awful quarterback either. I think bringing in Haynes King is kind of like this fake notion of you want to force an artificial quarterback battle due to the fact that, like, if you're forced to competition, then you become better. But Haynes King couldn't make it work at Texas A&M. If he couldn't make those talented receivers work, he's not going to make Georgia Tech work. So I think Pyron looked good, got hurt. He made this offense okay. I think that he had it. I think it was against Clemson last year. This is just based off memory, but I think he played pretty decent. I agree. I mean, like, your upside is 5 wins max. I think 4 falls a ton, and 3 is still like kind of knew what you're getting into, and yet still they're not the worst team in conference. So interesting. I have them worse than Georgia Southern. So that tells you where I think Georgia Tech would end up being like the 5th worst team in Georgia. So per usual, just stick to engineering.
Yeah. They honestly they play neutral site. It's technically a neutral site, even though it's in Atlanta, against Louisville week 1. I might be betting Louisville in that game. I think they're going to be a lot better week 1, but we'll see. I've tried to stop myself from thinking about betting week 1 games so far. I'm trying to just focus on prep for the season and just getting all these teams together. But once you start looking at these teams, it just makes you want to start looking at those early lines and being like,
it becomes easy.
Look at that game on the schedule.
And then, like, you'll see steam too. Like Georgia Tech was 9.5, and then they steamed all the way down to 8. And in some books, it's 7.5. And I was like, man, if this touches a touchdown, I gotta bet it. I completely agree. It is a once you're diving into teams, like I've been adding on win totals. I added one while we were doing this, and it's just like you can easily talk yourself into like, man, I need to go ahead and get that in.
Yeah. Oh, if that hits 7, then I'll be getting involved for sure. Louisville. And they're a team that going to Clemson and then last game of the year against Georgia, those are like the type of like minus 34.5 lines that I'm like, I think I might just have to lay this 35 points and just let Georgia win by 40. They're going to be really bad. But the last team that we have to talk about, they are the worst team in the ACC. They're, I think, could be even worse than they're projected to be. Their win total's at 3.5. It is a bit juiced to the under right now. It is minus 142 to under 3.5 wins. We talked earlier about Brennan Armstrong, who's been the quarterback there the last couple of years. He's transferred out. Their new quarterback is Tony Muskett, which is a great quarterback name, honestly. Having 100%. Muskett as your last name is badass if you're a really good quarterback. He transferred in from Monmouth, which is FCS team, and he was good quarterback at Monmouth and at the FCS level, but wasn't even kind of anywhere near the best quarterback in FCS, and now he's going to be playing in the ACC, which is a massive jump for a quarterback like that, despite how good their name is. They got Malik Washington, who transferred in from Northwestern, wide receiver, who's actually a really solid wide receiver. He's probably going to be the best player on the team for them. Other than that, there's really nobody on this team to be excited about. They have a decently tough schedule of North Carolina, Miami, at Louisville, Duke, NC State. They're out of conference schedule. They're playing Tennessee week 1. That's going to be a disaster. They're going to win by 50 points. They played James Madison at home, which James Madison still not eligible for playing for the Sun Belt Championship game, despite the fact that they were maybe the best team in the Sun Belt last year. So this is kind of like a Super Bowl for James Madison, like to go to UVA and beat them. They're going to be incredibly motivated. They go to Maryland. They're going to lose that game. So they're really going to struggle to find wins. The only game I'm willing to just give them on their schedule is home against William & Mary, week 6. Other than that, if they go 1-11, I honestly would not be shocked. I don't think they'll be able to beat Duke. They have Georgia Tech at home. I think their ceiling is 3 wins. William & Mary, Georgia Tech, and James Madison. If they can win those 3 games, that would be ideal for them. I already bet they're under 3.5 wins at minus 142. So that's what I think about this team. I think 3 wins is absolute ceiling. And if I was to project it just looking at the schedule, not using numbers, I think 1-11 is very possible.
Yeah, I think that James Madison game is your not make or break, but will kind of dictate how easy you get to sweat the rest of the year. Because if they lose to James Madison, they're not winning 4 games. And I think it's possible that they don't. I have James Madison as a 2.5 point favorite in that game. Your 4th win would have to be Virginia Tech at home to end the year. So like if you're sweating out, basically they have to win the 4 games that they can win to cover. I think you're in a pretty good spot. Maybe Georgia Tech at home would be a 1-2. Oh, that's part of the 4.
That's the 4.
You discussed like there's these teams that are going to be insane spreads, and you're just like, man, I think I have to lay it. I think Tennessee week 1 is that for me. I'm seeing a 27. I think Tennessee wins this game by 35. How am I going to bet it? Probably not lay the 27. I think a Tennessee first quarter spread, a first half team total, anything that's this idea that Virginia will have the ball, they will go 3 and out. They will give the ball to Tennessee, and Tennessee will instantly score basically all game. And so I think a first half team total, first quarter team total, anything that is Tennessee putting up points. Tennessee has been hyped all year. Milton's going to want to throw for 1,000 yards game one. And I think that Virginia is going to start off their year not very fun.
Yeah, and maybe they go 0-12. My hometown is Williamsburg, Virginia. I grew up going to William and Mary games for like 50 cents, and maybe William and Mary pulls off the upset and they just go 0-12. I wouldn't be surprised if Virginia lost to any team in the entire country. I wouldn't be surprised if they lost to a high school team. That's what I think about Virginia. So, and I really want Tony Muskett to be good. Like in an ideal world, Tony Muskett would be like the incoming quarterback at Alabama and just be like this total stud. But unfortunately, I don't think Tony Muskett is. So that is the whole ACC. Some really exciting stuff. It's going to be really exciting to see how the Clemson Florida State thing plays out, assuming they meet each other in the conference championship game. Some of those teams in the middle that we talked about, North Carolina and Duke and even NC State, Miami, Pitt, those could be interesting teams to watch. They could pull off an upset against one of those top teams in the conference for sure, or an upset over like a Notre Dame that a lot of those teams play. So it's definitely going to be an interesting year for the conference, but there are some teams that are just so bad that it's going to make the conference schedule tough some weeks when there's not good matchups. But just kind of running back over some of the win totals that we were looking at, I liked the UVA under 3.5. Virginia Tech under 5.5 is one that we looked at, not high on the Virginia schools.
I like the Lousiville under 8.5 at -158 at FanDuel. It's a lot of juice to lay, but I don't think they get 9 wins. You can get an 8 at local sports books. I think an 8 is fine, -110. But that half, 8 to 9, I think 9 wins is almost like they're going to need Johnny Manziel on that team or something to get to that 9th win. And then I locked in Virginia under 3.5 with youth. I think that number is amazing. So by all means, yeah. I still like it at the number you laid, 140. It's completely fine. Again, we talked about it a few times, but win totals are different when it comes to juice. Like I think that if you cannot find a ceiling, you're willing to lay a little bit more juice. And I don't see 4 wins for Virginia. So if I had to lay 140, I would. But if I don't have to, by all means, I won't.
Yeah. I'm always happier to lay juice on an under win total than an over. When you can just see like this team is not capable of winning 4 games, then it's like I'll lay the juice. When you're like, I'm gonna have to be having this team beat a few teams that could pull off upsets against them, is when it gets scarier laying that juice. But the last thing I'm gonna ask you, if you had to pick now, who wins the conference championship game in the ACC?
Yeah, I would probably go Clemson. I think that if you could get like a 2-1, 250, Clemson's probably a good price too. I just think I'm a really big fan of Riley. I think Klubnik's plenty fine, and that I'm just, though I understand the transfer portal is needed, I understand all of this stuff is needed. I do think that it takes time to mesh, and the issue with the transfer portal is that you're getting talent that is willing to like move on. And so like if this Florida State team, who has a really tough start of season, starts off 2-2, where is the locker room at? And so that's my only worry with them. And I think if they get past that, I mean, it's gonna be a really good game. I think Clemson is a 3-point favorite on a neutral, so by all means Clemson, but it's going to be tier 1, tier 2. I think it's going to be a really fun season in the ACC.
Yeah, and I will say I as a Clemson hater, obviously, like I'll be rooting for Florida State all year. But I will say, if you like Florida State and think by the end of the season they can be better than Clemson, I would wait until I think they're going to lose to Clemson. I think they're probably going to lose to LSU, and then I think they're going to lose to Clemson. You'll be able to get a pretty good number on them to win the conference, definitely better than the +185 that's out there right now if they lose to Clemson. So I would say if you like Florida State, just wait. And after week 4, and then even like you said, where are they at after that week 4? Even wait another week and kind of see how they respond from maybe a 2-2 start. And if they are responding well, then maybe try to get a better number than the one that's out there right now on them to win.
Yeah, and we discussed the tiers are very obvious in this league. So like I think that if it gets to Florida State plus 350, like if you can get 3.5 to 1, hop on at any time, because I do think that it's them in the championship, and then worst case you just hedge out at a profitable bet. But either of these teams, I think if they get over 3 to 1, they're in the championship in my opinion. It's kind of like in the SEC, and so by all means, I think you're getting a good price action.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming on. It was a good time covering the ACC. We'll be rooting for Duke on your behalf all season long. And I'm glad we were finally able to do something. And I'd love to have you back on during the season at some point.
Yeah, it was fun. I locked in a couple bets while we did it, so learned something every
Always
single
good.
day.
Yeah. So you're at Keep Betting Co. That's CO. On Twitter, is there anything else? You have a Discord people can join, and yeah, everybody should go do that.
Yeah, the Discord I think is free currently. Basically, the only shield I'll give, we'll make it quick because this was like an hour and a half show. We'll make it quick. If you made it this far, the Discord has like a paid version. Feel free. If you made it this far, slide in my DMs or Blake's DMs. We will get you set up so that you can enjoy it just for making it this far. But we built out a bot that will basically find discrepancies in the market. So like if FanDuel, you know FanDuel is not the best sports book in the world, and they didn't make the best price in the world. So we will find the best price in the world for you compared to FanDuel. And if there's expected value, just like a stock market, like if there's value to be had, a bot will send you a DM. I think I've told every person that I talk to, I think that this is the coolest product I have ever seen, and I am the one who made it. So cannot wait for it to be done. It's taken me 6 months. So if you made it this far, just hit me up. We will get you free access to it. I just want people to use it, enjoy it, and find it valuable. Hope you found this video valuable. I locked in some bets while we were here. So it was a good time.
Yeah, I'm in the Discord. I'm in there and checking things out. I'm really excited for the bot to come out. And so yeah, follow Corby. Thanks for listening to the show, and catch everybody next time.